Kenya Airways, like every other legacy carrier, suffered the effects of the pandemic in 2020. It meant that the carrier wasn't flying. Not flying meant there were no revenues. And as you well know, the salaries are sustained by revenues that come from flights that are done by any airline. So there are two revenues that were withheld to the staff. One is the staff provident fund, and one are actually salaries. So staff took a cut in pay for salaries, but the provident fund, which is some form of pension really, was deferred. It was suspended. And that suspension is what is the bone of contention between the pilots and the KQ management team.
Is it just a question around the pension payments, or are there other issues that have been bubbling under, festering for a long period of time that are now also being included in this dispute?
Well, if you ask me, pilots have asked for the managers some senior managers to resign. They want them off the management team. But if you ask me, that is not a pilot issue. It's an operational issue, and it has nothing to do with pilots. Because in my opinion, a pilot's job is basically to get his equipment from point A to B, and safely and efficiently, as much as the airline provides, which is what has been happening. So management issues are extraneous to any other discussion that should center around staff welfare.
Do you think that Khafafa jumped the gun? Because looking at the financial situation that KQ finds itself in, it's been heavily reliant on taxpayer support for the better part of a decade now. I think it last made a profit in 2012. We had those shock loss numbers that came through in 2013. COVID has devastated our ability to fly. Striking now at a point where you're losing, according to the airline CEO, $2.5 million in revenue every day. That sounds pretty counterproductive.
It's actually irrational for pilots to go on strike at this particular point in time. Reason being, KQ is on the mend now. For 10 or so years, it has operated at losses, but year-on-year losses have been reducing, especially after the pandemic, as a result of the management team's efforts. So they've been reducing to the extent that KQ looks, all things held constant, KQ looks to profitability in the next 2 years. So a strike at this particular juncture in time is premature, is ill-advised, is illegal, as has been declared by the courts, and it is certainly not in good taste.
In your opinion, are there enough CPL, airline transport pilots with ATP licenses available to fill in those slots? Can we find, roughly 200 airline pilots at short notice, which at this point seems like what the management team is looking to do?
One thing I have to notice that not all airline pilots are keen on going on strike. It's unfortunate that Khafafa happens to be a very powerful organization, and it has hectored those who are reluctant to join into the strike into taking industrial action. But the general feeling is that if these pilots are laid off and they are made to reapply for their jobs, a significant portion of them could end up applying. Say out of the 400, we could possibly get about 300 or so pilots reapplying for their jobs, and the other 100 can be filled in from the abundance of pilots available around the world. In fact, about 2 or so years ago, when pilots were asked to allow foreign pilots who are cheaper, significantly cheaper than KQ pilots, to join the airline, they refused. Why? Because they knew that there's an abundance of pilots willing to take up KQ jobs at KQ pay. And KQ pay is significantly higher than the industry average. So yes, to answer to your question, short answer, yes. Kenya Airways is capable of filling up the slots that will be left by any pilot who vacates their job.